Maybe it's because we're talking. I don't know.
Oh, anyway.
All right. Well, Chair, we are ready to rock and roll if you are, I believe.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for signing on. This is the Creswell Planning Commission meeting for October 15th of 2020. It is 5:09 p.m. Let's see. Planning commissioners that are here would be Jessica Lanstra, Chair, Susan Bennett, Vice Chair, David Christopher, Ed Gunderson, Seth Clark, Patrick Gearing, and Tammy Sue Shuck. Welcome, everybody. Let's see, did we have some time to review the minutes of September 3rd, 2020? Yes, yes. All right. Let's see, who would like to move to approve the minutes?
David will do that.
All right.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a move from David and a second from Patrick. And then I need to do a roll call here. Susan, are you for the move to approve? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, and then let's see. I'm going to go down my list here. Ed?
Yes.
Seth?
Yes.
All right, and Tammy?
Yes.
Okay, looks like we have unanimous approval to approve the minutes of September 3rd, 2020. All right, moving on. Thank you to any audience that is out there. I'm not sure if there's anyone on YouTube or not watching us, but if there is, welcome. All right, do we have any commissioner comments? Nobody?
No comments.
No comments?
No
All
comment.
right. We're moving on then. Today we have a discussion on recreational vehicle park standards, RV parks. Today we will be reviewing material and discussing standards. Maddie, would you like to take that over?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners, for your flexibility in joining us again via a different streaming service. I'm trying to find our sweet spot, and we're going through all the chairs for the three little bears. Too big, too small, just right. We'll find it. Tonight we are discussing recreational vehicle parks, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But namely that we had some interest from a development professional who asked a series of questions about recreational vehicle parks, and I had a hard time determining some of the standards for them. So I would like to review some standards or the standards of a few other small cities in Oregon and have an open discussion sort of in a work session format to determine where we are as a city on, first of all, what some of the standards for a park look like and what differentiates, for example, an RV park from a mobile home park. You have in your packet a few items that are worth reviewing or mentioning. I did try to prepare a short memo for you to summarize some of the items. And forgive me for reading on a screen that's just to the right of me, so I'm going to keep looking that way. The cities of Stayton, Sutherland, and I also found Yamhill County had some good verbiage. And then finally, Building Codes Division has some minimum standards that I thought might be pertinent just for context. Basically, Creswell has a mobile home or manufactured home park set of standards. And where we find this in the development code is in section 2.2200, which is called special standards. It's the same area of the code that cites standards for multifamily housing and accessory dwelling units. So areas in the community that have specific standards. And typically that's indicated in that handy chart at the beginning of the residential section by an S. So you'll recall that typically things are either P, permitted, N, not permitted, CU, conditional use, or S, permitted with standards. And mobile home parks are identified, and there are a series of requirements for the placement of manufactured or mobile home units. What is missing, perhaps, is the differentiation between a mobile home park and a recreational vehicle park. And similarly, recreational vehicle parks are identified as outright allowed uses in commercial zones. And this is something that you might want to think about. I guess I come to this question from two perspectives. One, from a very basic sense, is one, a recreational vehicle park is typically somewhere like a hotel where someone is transient, they visit the RV park, they park for 2 weeks, maybe less, vacation somewhere, and then leave. They might visit a lot of restaurants and need services. They're not staying for a long duration. Perhaps they're staying at the longest as like a visiting medical professional or some other profession that requires traveling. Whereas a mobile home park really is a neighborhood. And it's a place where people place mobile homes or manufactured homes and they live there. And so one is a commercial use, recreational vehicle parks, and one is a residential use, which is the mobile home or manufactured home park. So those two things being true, it seems that there might be different standards for those. And I tried to compare them via, I guess, this chart that's on page 2 of that memo packet. So the memo is the first page, and then there's a manufactured mobile home park versus RV park comparison. And you'll see that I tried to do kind of like a Venn diagram to show how the two things are similar but not quite the same. RV parks, for one, typically have much smaller spaces for the facilities that are provided. So between 600 and 1,000 square feet. Usually the minimum density for a mobile home park is more like a cottage cluster scale of development, where you have units that are on about 2,500 square feet or more, which gets to about 12 units an acre. RV parks are usually packed in there, and they occupy up to about 25 units an acre. And then there are some common features that they both have: roads, driveways, usually some fencing, lighting, the way they're all set up. But you'll notice that RV parks have something that's pretty unique, or the common areas that they have are usually shared among people in a different way. So RV parks typically have, and actually Building Codes Division requires that they have a public shower facility or toilets, because not all RVs have bathrooms within them. And then similarly, dump facilities, an assumed limitation of stay, trash facilities and then sometimes there's like a communal store or a market or something within the development. So you'll kind of see that there are two questions. There's one, what differentiates an RV park from a mobile home park? And then two, are there standards that we should include that might be unique to RV parks that we include in the commercial standards for the city that speak specifically to this type of development, and perhaps identify some of the constraints of where they should and should not be located. The most recent discussion, and before I kind of close my opening remarks, the most recent discussion indicated they'd like to, the interest was to build an RV park on the property that's just across from Blue Valley Bistro and Weimar in that big field between Cloverdale Road and Melton Road. And there were a couple questions about whether that's a suitable place for an RV park, based on traffic, based on visibility and or privacy of that location. And there were a series of questions about, well, what prevents that from becoming a mobile home park? If it starts out housing RVs, we don't have any kind of differentiation that says, the length of stay is limited and this is how that property can be used. So I'd like to open it up for any points that you found particularly interesting, any areas that you would like to highlight, and then I'll go through a series of questions with you about where you think it fits into our current matrix of development code language.
Well, the way things are now, they can't have the density of vehicles that you talk about 25 per acre units per acre, but on the mobile home park it's 12 units per acre. So if we don't have a standard, it's not going to be as profitable.
Just for point of interest, many years ago, like 15, when I first started on the planning commission, it was a great desire of, I don't know if it was the community or the makeup of the commission, that no more mobile home parks, no more storage units. And I guess that was just the attitude, say 15 years ago, but that's what it was like 15 years ago or so.
What would you say the temperature is of this planning commission for that on that topic?
Well, it's a totally different commission, and I think with the right parameters and the right location, of which I don't think the one over there by Weimar is a good location, personally, it would be okay.
Now they are ready for a dance. They go on their castle. Where's the castle?
I would like to see a more permanent housing in that location. With, we've talked before about, having it be intermixed with shops and things, but I can't picture that becoming an RV park right there. I mean, Seth, you own a business across from there. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, RV park is probably not what I want to see next to me, but an empty field is great for visibility, but it's not great for increasing my customer base. So if I was to look at the silver lining to something, it would be at least there'd be more people. But I agree with you. I think because of its unique zoning as resort, Maddie, can you correct me if I'm wrong? I think it's zoned resort commercial over there.
Close. Those lots actually are zoned general commercial.
Okay.
So the area, so you're correct. You're kind of, there's a pattern here that we can sort of weave between the comments, is that at some point, David, you're right. There was a desire to kind of limit the number of RV parks in town, and then secondly, part of the Emerald Valley original vision or concept plan involves a high-end RV park and a hotel that are in those two lots that are right next to the clubhouse, the golf course, those two vacant lots by Sunday Drive. And there were these discussions about should there be another RV park, and is that a suitable use? And maybe they should be identified within a resort commercial zone because they do serve a vacation or visitor community.
The RV park we have now apparently is full most of the time, so I'm assuming there might be demand for that type of thing.
I have a couple questions. Can I speak? So the first question is: has anybody talked to the Marquis about what their about this? I mean, because don't they own both, right? I mean, they own an RV park and a mobile home park. And then my second question, I guess, would be, Maddie, are you wanting from us just to focus on like a way to distinguish these two, or is this just an open discussion and see where the conversation takes us?
It can be both. I think that there is a distinction between the two. My two questions are kind of like, where do you see the RV park? Because we do have mobile home park standards. Where do you see the RV park question fitting into our code? Do you feel that it truly is a commercial use? And if so, should there be specific criteria for what kinds of commercial lots the RV park can utilize? And then secondly, there are some opportunities to perhaps enhance some of our mobile home park language in the process of making that amendment to show the distinction, to recognize that mobile home parks are more of a residential use on the whole. And absolutely, Seth, I guess I'm open to any conversation topic. This is an early discussion, and none of the RV park owners have been consulted on it. But certainly we will.
Okay, thank you. I mean, just for my sake, and I guess this is just assumed because it's not written in code yet, but I always was under the impression that mobile home parks were more long-term and RV parks were short-term, say like 28 days or less. All right, I wouldn't be opposed to proposing that as adding that to the code to kind of help identify the two separately.
Well, some of the problem with that making it too short stay is that some of those traveling nurses and doctors stay in places for 6 months at a time or more.
Yeah.
And people working construction also can be sometimes a year on location. So
right. I really hesitate to take a stance that is taking away somebody's housing opportunity. It's just, if we're trying to create a distinction, I mean, are we okay with somebody pulling into an RV and staying there for 6 months? I guess that would be the bigger question.
Well, if it's an RV, it's an RV. I mean, the thing's designed to be moved around, unlike a mobile home park. You know, it's licensed and registered for the road, and it's kind of an RV. And I don't know why it would matter how long they stay, as long as they maintain things.
I know one of the standards I read about, their time distinction was 180 days, if I remember correctly. Matt, I think that was in the Staten standards. And so that would give, so what it did is it gave them 180 days to be in the park, and then 7 days where they had to be checked out, and then they could check back in after that for another 180 days. So that's just kind of an example of a way where it could be, if we don't, if you want them to stay shorter periods of time, that they could check out and check back in. I think for me, the only part that I kind of found a little odd about that is, 180 days, it was about 6 months or whatever. And then I felt like, what's the point of them being, what's the point of them leaving for 7 days checking out and then coming back for another. I thought that was kind of odd. Like if you're gonna let them stay for 6 months, then your standards to have them check out for 7 days and then they can stay again for another 6 months. I thought that was a little odd, but an interesting discussion piece.
I think the reason for that is to make sure that piece of machinery is still movable. And it's not something that's going to be abandoned there.
I know that happens at the Village Green in Cottage Grove. They have the RV spots, and the intention is that folks that don't want a motel, that are coming down I-5, will stay there in the RV park. But it has become a long-term housing facility for the unhoused folks that own RVs. And that's exactly what they do, Jessica. They get every 30 days, they move off for 2 days and then come right back into their spot. It's kind of silly.
Well, but I don't know if it's silly when you consider that ensures that those things are licensed and insured for the road, and that they are movable, and they're not going to end up abandoned there.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true, Ed.
So as you can see, there are some practical reasons for those lengths of stay. I was just noticing.
Hey, Maddie.
Yes.
I was trying to make a comment and I forgot to unmute, but in reference to the registration thing, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to keep their vehicle or their RV registered, because they're not going to get a citation unless a police officer sees them on the road operating it with an invalid registration.
Mm-hmm. That's true, Patrick. Just to say that there are a variety of 28 days is a great suggestion, Seth. I noticed Sutherland has 120 days. Staten, as you mentioned, Jessica, has 180 days. But this idea that the units are still movable, I think, is quite important. Whether you want that to be a standard that requires a timeline, or simply a verification, or some kind of, you may not stay in one spot for more than 120 days, meaning you have to drive it to the other side of the park and pull into a different space. Though that could also be an option. But I guess getting to the point, which is that, yes, there are folks that need extended stay places to live for their work that takes them to different locations. But at the same time, we risk, as a city, we risk becoming a place where old RVs show up and simply reside for an undetermined amount of time. And from the perspective of a commercial use, that's pretty problematic because, again, there's opportunity cost for those locations being utilized as residential uses.
Now, the park we have here now requires that the RVs be no more than 10 years old. And that's common.
I've never even heard of that. So the RVs have to be from 2010 or newer?
Yeah. I mean, there's different time constraints, but my son was living in an RV for 2 years, traveling around working, and his was pretty new, but he ran into that.
Susan, did you have a comment?
20 years, but.
I can't stop thinking about the inquiry of putting it in that location. And like you said, then it becomes a residential, but yet temporary residential thing. And is that what we as a city want to have. I thought the goal here was to attract more businesses so that we weren't this pass-through commuting where everyone leaves our town, that we create jobs. And I cannot picture that being in that space.
I think for, just devil's advocate discussion, I think they create jobs. I think some of the standards I was reading in here, obviously you have to have somebody living on the property that, is a manager. They're talking about small store being on the property, which means, maybe that's one person that runs it depending on the size. But that there was quite a bit of upkeep as far as trash cans and, just the way it needs to be maintained. So I think as far as jobs, it does create some. I think having more of that type of housing isn't exactly what we need. But, I think it becomes, obviously the question here is we're not trying to be specific as far as approving somebody to have one at this point, but instead differentiating between, what we would want if somebody was trying to bring one in. Do we want our standards to be, super high? Do we want them to, only be able to have them, 10 years old to be able to bring it into the park? Do we want them to only stay short amounts of time? What do we want it to look like? Do we want pretty green grass, around every site? Do we want beautiful trash receptacles that are only hidden away? Some of the standards I was reading about, specifically in the Staten one, they're pretty high standards. I'm reading this and I'm picturing a pretty darn nice looking place. So I don't think they all need to be ugly, but I think what we need to do is we need to sit here and we need to decide if we are going to have one, what do we want it to look like? What, if it were there where you had to drive by it every single day, what would you want to see?
Well, and how do the existing parks, whether it be the RV park or the couple of manufactured home parks that we have, how would they fit in? Would they have to be grandfathered if they didn't meet the standards? Or is the city of Creswell going to go, head to head with the owners of the existing parks to bring them up to the standard that we create? This would be a whole lot easier if we didn't already have these existing in our town, I think. But we already do have them.
Hey,
so
Maddie,
what do we do with those?
Maddie, quick question for you. So let's say we as a city decided to do something like this. What would make would basically the code enforcement side of the city be the ones that enforces if they start to see that the state of the park go down?
Yes. So a couple answers to questions that floated around. Chair, you stated the mission of our discussion tonight much more accurately and succinctly than I did. Thank you. Patrick or Susan, to your point about existing parks, this would be for the development of a new park. The development code would be very challenging to apply to existing parks. The same way mobile home parks have standards, and then there are existing parks that were pre-standards that exist and will continue to exist like they are, save some health and life safety improvements until they are no longer utilized or owned by their current managers. And then Patrick, there would be a code enforcement component to this. Sometimes cities set certain lengths of stay, for example, to go back to that component of our discussion, based on whether or not the RVs are paying transient room tax. So 28 days being the threshold after which we no longer receive transient room tax, similar to a hotel. However, code enforcement would be the type, just like a mobile home park, code enforcement would be the way that the city would enforce certain standards like trash receptacles, the management of landscaping, certain concerns. Again, there are different approaches that we have to take because it is a private property and folks can maintain their property to some extent as they wish. But that also has some limitations in terms of meeting their site review requirements. So the land use process is a way for the city to set those thresholds, similar to the way that we considered the adaptation of the motel at your last meeting. And you noticed that there were several requirements about reorienting their public spaces and shared areas that should those areas ever fall into a state of disrepair, we do have grounds to at least write letters and raise public awareness about some of those challenges.
This question about, these RVs require a lot of maintenance. They've got generators, they've got low voltage lighting systems, they've got their engines, and some of them that are sitting there for 6 months, which means there's usually problems. So maybe the more RVs we had here, the more opportunities there would be for maintenance. People, in some of the parks, people want people to clean their RVs periodically. So there really is an opportunity for a lot of work and businesses associated with RVs.
Okay, and also one thing that I know about the way RV parks generally run is they have unpaid camp hosts who are hired. You have to, pass a background check, but you get to park your RV for a certain stated time for free, and you do the work at the park. So it's a trade. And there are people that travel around the United States because I have a friend that's doing it right now. They just got finished with a 4-month stint in Idaho. And to stay in Idaho for 4 months, then they had to do the cleanup and work in the office. And so anyway, I'm just saying that, yeah, there's somebody there that does the work, but they are also not part of our community. They are passing through. They are not being paid to do a job, except for getting free rent.
So to your point, I think, Susan, the way that I would, and I appreciate your comments, the one way to articulate what you're describing is that, maybe let's focus the conversation as Chair Lanstra suggested. Let's focus on what is the ideal park and or RV community look like, and then secondly, we can accept and recognize that though RV parks have a lot of multipliers, meaning they bring people and people spend money and people need services, etc., that there is still quite a significant difference between an RV park in terms of taxable value and therefore benefit to the community as a whole versus mixed-use development per se, or let's say that might have permanent housing above more traditional designed commercial space. So that built version of mixed use is always going to be a little bit more economically profitable for the community and perhaps offer more in the long run. However, these RV parks are a great way to bring people into the community. So maybe let's think about them in the same way that someone might build a hotel, that we want these sort of ideal components of those short stay facilities and highlight some of those high points. Because I think that the standards that you see from Sutherland and Staten, I thought were particularly inspiring in terms of how do we paint this picture? Someone shows up in the community and says, what do I have to do to build Creswell's ideal RV park? And I think there are several components. I think, putting nuisances in places that aren't really lovely, in places where you can't really see them. And then similarly accentuating amenities like public spaces or dog park areas, or perhaps even requiring the planting of trees. That's something that I picked up from a couple of different communities. They have fairly robust landscaping standards for both RV parks and mobile home parks. And given the fact that mobile home parks are here to stay and are likely not to be a brief use of the land, they turn into communities. It would make sense to me that we consider, bringing some of the standards we put into street design into some of our mobile home park standards to add a little bit of, neighborhood feeling to them.
I like that idea.
Well, and something I'd really like to point out too is, as much as this conversation, I feel like, a lot of people are kind of, maybe pushing towards the idea of maybe we don't want more. The less standards we have, the easier it is for somebody to put whatever the heck they want. So what Maddie's really trying to get us to say is, if we were to get one, if we were to have one, the higher the standards we set, if you think of it that way, the harder it actually is for somebody to do it. I read through some of this, and if you guys look at the, let's see, it's page 4 of the packet, it says, but it's in the state and draft, and just reading, I'm on section Q about trash receptacles. It's like ridiculous, like what they're asking these people to do when they bring, this in. They're wanting at least yearly inspections, if not more than that. So that they get inspected, the park does, at least one time a year, and they get a written report to the manager of the park stating this is what you're not meeting. Yep. And so I think that, even though this conversation's hard to have, I think being told that somebody asked about doing one where they asked to is a little distracting from the conversation that we need to have. What do we want to see? What do we want to see in these parks? Do we want to see decorative hidden trash receptacles? Do we want to see pedestrian walkways? Do we want to see common spaces? What makes your guys's, ideal park if you were to have to drive by one in the town you live in?
Thank you, Jessica. I was actually brainstorming on what you were saying earlier too, just like, well, let's just assume we have one or we're going to have one. What criteria do you want them to live up to? And I mean, just being a person of, I like high standards. I like a lot of green space and things to look well kept. The 10-year-old trailer thing, I had no idea. That blows my mind. But hey, that works for me. So yeah, basically, if somebody wanted to occupy that space where Milton and Cloverdale come together, I want it to be high end to match the houses that are in that neighborhood, or down there just a little bit further on Emerald Parkway.
Well, we have standards for commercial stuff now, so they don't look bad.
We do have some, Ed, that's true. And some of those, I guess you've highlighted something that I think is fantastic, Seth, there regarding pedestrian, or maybe it was Jessica, pedestrian walkways and connectivity. If folks are going to bring in their RV and stay for a while, we don't necessarily want them driving in and out all the time. We might encourage them to walk somewhere and feel safe walking through our community and using our services. So the connectivity component of our commercial district, so just referring back to some of our existing standards. I don't think any of this is going to be revolutionary or change what we have in our books, but it will connect the dots so that when someone says, oh, RV, okay, landscaping standards will match existing commercial development standards, or common spaces will refer to common spaces provided by multifamily housing, for example. and might require covered areas, would certainly require some kind of pedestrian amenity, could require a certain amount of tree coverage or canopy, benches, seating areas, places for people to gather. Trash receptacles, we require screening for those typically. I just noticed that Staten and Sutherland both use the same really detailed standard for that, like tight-fitting lids, 200 feet apart, must be removed every day, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if there's any other particular amenity that you think is important to include. Do you feel like it's an RV park as a commercial use? Would you like to see, or would you allow some kind of store or market that's part of that operation?
Yeah, makes sense.
Right. I think Staten's, what they've got in their plan is probably very, very good. I really like that one. And having been not driving an RV, but pulling a travel trailer and doing a lot of stopping at RV parks of all kinds, all the way down to sunbird cities down in Arizona and New Mexico, through Utah and Colorado and such. The most desirable and the nicer ones, yes, were a lot like Staten's profile. And yes, we even stayed in some that were little four space units on private property. You've got Good Neighbor Sam's all over the place. There's one at the coast that's really nice, but they've got the physical barriers between. But I think it would be best not to allow people to stay for 6 months, 4 months, maybe 60 to 90 days, because if you're allowed to stay that long, I feel you're going to stay and want to stay even longer. It needs to be a temporary respite for that vehicle.
I agree.
Do you like landscaping between the spaces, or would you prefer fencing, or there could be an option, I suppose?
Right. It's all of the ones that we really liked at the coast. One of the casinos that got one down here, down I-5. That's an excellent RV park. We've stayed there a number of times. Mm-hmm. But the ones out of Oregon that we went to, the nice ones had a definite division between spaces, bushes, trees, and they tried to do it a lot in our state parks, in the RV parks in the state that the state has. Those are really nice. And then there are some that are not nice. That's just the way I imagine they're coded and the way it's enforced.
Mm-hmm.
One concern I have is fire suppression.
Yes.
True. And I maybe I went over it, but it didn't seem to get addressed in the Staten or the other paper. Did I miss it?
The Staten one talks about fire hydrants that have to be installed so that all recreational vehicles and other structures are within 250 feet of an improved fire hydrant, as measured along the center line of a street. So it had fire hydrants, and then I recall it also talking about fire extinguishers. Mm-hmm. They have to be kept in service buildings and other locations conveniently and readily accessible for you.
I'm sorry, all of us RVers have got fire extinguishers in our vehicle.
Inside, yeah.
Yeah, but if you're not in it when it catches fire, somebody needs to be able to put that fire out in a hurry.
Well, of course.
And
the
then
Sutherland one has a comment about it meeting Oregon Fire Code at a minimum. And then it also has upgrades have to be kept to be in line with the state fire marshal.
That's true, and all the comments are great regarding fire standards. What might make sense is I could work with Danny Soulsby, our fire marshal, to determine what either the Oregon Fire Code or International Fire Code says in terms of what are best practices for RV parks. I think the distance measured from the center line question, I think, probably refers to those criteria, if I had to guess. But fire is a very, very real concern about, especially at that density. 25 units an acre can have a lot of impact on many people if there's ever a conflagration. So that said, it sounds like health and life safety, are there any other, aside from trash issues, is there anything else that you can think of that leads to a more functional, more functional design? I know some people who have RVs, RV spots will have like little picnic tables, like a campsite, and they might have fire rings. Is that something that you would allow or want to allow in an RV park?
Yeah.
As an RVer, yes, I want a fire pit. I would like a picnic table.
Okay.
It's also really desirable to have a shower room, bathroom, laundry place to be able to use. And I still think we need to emphasize 60 to 90 days is long enough.
I think 90 days is fair.
I like 90.
Yeah,
Hey.
90 is good.
I'm hearing consensus on 90 days.
There was one of these that was 120, was 4 months, but I do agree with the other commissioners on 90.
Thank you, Tammy.
I don't, because of the traveling
One other
backwards and
thing,
contract construction workers.
Noted.
Do you think, Ed, if they were able to, do you think having that pull off time of check out for a week and come back, or like, do you think that would make it better, or do you think that just doesn't help?
Well, I mean, it would be better than, the absolute limit of 90. I mean, yeah, if they could be there 90 and go away for a while and come back, it'd be better.
Okay.
and another safety issue is just the accessibility to pulling in and out into traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Would be important wherever it would be located.
I think another thing that would need to be looked at would be like lighting and stuff like that, in case of thefts and that kind of stuff, because we are talking about RVs, which are not really known to be like a secure front door easily broken into.
Mm-hmm. Good point, Patrick.
You'd be surprised, Patrick, how many of these units have got alarm systems on them. But Susan, your comment about pulling in and out, that's real important also, because you've got units, big school bus size units, Greyhound bus size units, and then you've also got the fifth wheels and the travel trailers that you've got a big 4x4 pulling something that's 25, 30 feet long, and so they're going to need room to move around.
Oh, David, you got 35-foot travel trailer or travel buses with trailers.
Right. Oh, yeah. And they're towing their Jeep Cherokee behind them. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think I hear some consensus that some of the standards I picked out, as examples, might not be such bad requirements. And it also, I hear from you that it's not such a bad thing to have a robust set of requirements to assure that when and if there is interest, we get a fairly high caliber of park design.
They should put a pool in.
A pool?
I mean, if you develop a really nice park, it's like Field of Dreams. If you build it and it's really nice, people will stop here and they'll go they'll play golf and they'll go to the winery tours and
Right.
things. It's cheaper to pull my trailer and go somewhere than it is to stay in a motel.
Yeah.
And the other thing
It's
is
a nice
that,
place to stay and there's a lot going on. We'll spend 3 or 4 days at as little as $30 to $50 a night with full hookups. And I'm talking TV, cable, on the whole 9 yards. And yeah.
Hey, Ed, what would you say about maybe putting an option for longer term stays? Where they have
because of an employment contract?
Yeah, so if they're a contractor and they're there for work, if they should have paperwork that identifies them as being there for work, and then that park, whoever the park manager is or the owner is able to identify them as a contractor, and they can put them in a different section of the park.
Maybe the contractor could strike a deal or have a contract with the park, the employer.
I think that if we were to prescribe a general standard and be open to some kind of conditional use or a component of someone's proposed design that highlighted either longer stay spots or particular needs like we've described as they want to present it. I don't know how much we need to get into the operations of the park so much as I want to focus a little bit more on the space and the design of it, and perhaps even as detailed as the operations to some extent for traffic access. But in terms of how many days, and then of course that, as everyone is aware, Patrick, you brought up about compliance. This is something that the city will have to sort out what its level of commitment is to inspecting and managing the length of stay limitations. What it does, though, is that it provides some recourse if for some reason there's an issue at the park with, interactions with the neighbors or conflicts that arise from those two uses being close together, that perhaps there can be some recourse related to the length of stay. But if I might just kind of redirect our conversation, how do you feel about if an RV park wanted to locate next to your neighbor or nearby to your neighborhood? Are there concerns about distance or spacing, like setbacks? I noticed some of the setback requirements indicate 30 feet from the boundaries of the property. Is it more appropriate to place common areas in certain central locations or near access to the park? Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of orientation?
I would think common areas would be more central than at an access point, just because it keeps it more for the people who are in it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't find any issues with the 30-foot setbacks, but 30 feet, not that much difference than 35.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
David, you're muted.
Do you need help?
Your mouth is moving, but nothing's coming out.
I can't unmute you. Oh, there you go.
There we go.
There you are.
I'm unmuted now. Oh, technology. I finally got this laptop to work, period. There does need to be, barrier, fence, foliage, trees, bushes, whatever. Also realize that some of these spaces are going to be drive-through spaces. They're not all in the parks we've gone to. They're not all back into spaces.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the big rigs, like the ones that you drive through, the ones up at Belknap, if they're still there, a lot of the drive-throughs are really popular. But yeah, there needs to be, and that's one of the things, some of the restrictions were, this couldn't be done on, the property had to be more than 2 acres or more than 1 acre. I think we also need to look at that too.
So the acreage, sometimes in some cities, sometimes that is what determines where an RV park can be located, because of those minimum land area or lot size requirements. Another factor, as you mentioned, is the ability to fit enough lots or spaces into that 2 acres to make it a feasible investment. So I kind of liked the 30 feet 30-foot setback, and then having the units at least 20 feet apart from one another, and having fencing or foliage to block, at least at the perimeter, and have that be of a certain density that at least there's some screening from the road and traffic and also neighbors. So that all seemed pretty acceptable to me. Does anyone have any concerns with that?
No.
Okay. Any last thoughts before we wrap up this conversation? I just wanted to I appreciate all of your good thoughts on this. It's a big question. But my last concern or interest, after anyone has something to say, is that I wonder if you have feelings about bringing some of the design standards that we mentioned into mobile home park design.
I'm in favor of that as well. I always have a hard time doing something that would force a existing business to have to make radical changes. And if it doesn't, then I would say anything going forward needs to be up to a higher standard than what we've had in the past.
Well, then if there was any major modification to an existing park, they would have to bring it up. Just
correct.
So it'd be nice to have a standard.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have any other last minute thoughts or ideas that you want to add into this?
I just had one more, and we don't have to go too deep into it, but going back to the 90 days and then the pull out for 2, 5, or 7 days, would it make sense to say that if they come back, they have to be in a different spot?
Yes.
Well, I don't know if we can really dictate. I mean, that's kind of going back to what Maddie was saying. We can't really dictate on the operations of it, because if that's the only spot that they have because they're full, are you going to tell them that they can't come back in?
I realize that. And that was definitely crossed my mind. The purpose of making the rule, though, would be to make sure that these are intended to be a transitional space as opposed to permanent housing.
Correct.
Right. Well, and maybe they're, like we said before, about having dedicated spots that could be longer term based on an employment contract. But again, we're not going to really know. We're not the managers of the park. But if there was 2 or 3 spaces for the type of people, then, if they were here working in construction, then, they could stay for longer than 90 days if they had that employment reason.
I would say another way to go about that, instead of the employment contract, could simply be that a certain percentage of your total spaces could be dedicated towards long-term stays.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works.
So I'll call that a long-term stay option.
That's what I was trying to saying is if you designate a certain area, a certain amount of spaces that is more long-term.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I will write this up. Thank you for your comments. And I will do my best to capture your intent in this discussion and put together what looks like some code amendment that fits pieces and parts into our code, and then also pulls out certain areas and highlights the importance or uniqueness of RV parks. You know, I looked at the city of Cottage Grove. They have a dedicated zone for mobile home parks. It's like a separate zoning designation that actually just identifies what presumably were the existing mobile home parks at that time. And then there are, it's a little bit different for RV parks. But I think, you know, comments that I heard around landscaping and pedestrian connectivity and common areas were kind of the highlights that I would identify as areas that we could enhance our mobile home park standards around. Again, kind of bringing the standards up a bit more from where we've started with those facilities. So thank you for your thoughts on that. And unless there's additional comment from Chair or others, I propose I'll take it from here.
I think the one thing was refuse burning, not be permitted on, that's one of the state ones. And then also that an inoperable RV, after 30 days, it's basically the park's, it's the park owner's problem to, you know, get rid of it. So it goes away. So in case there is something that's broken down or whatever, that we have something that says here's what you can do with it, or, you know, it's now your problem, get rid of it so you can have your space back, or, you know, something along the lines of that.
Good news is we have refuse burning on the municipal code books from, I think, the 80s, which is great. No refuse burning in the city, though we know sometimes that happens, unfortunately. And then inoperable RVs. In fact, I think we did call those out when we were working on some standards for inoperable vehicles in the right-of-way. But maybe we can also call out similar requirements for that in this particular section. Thank you for those.
All right. Maddie, do you want to move on to the staff development summary?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Commissioners, again for a very productive conversation about RV parks and mobile home parks. I am happy to report that we are continuing to work with the folks from the Creswell Butte Apartments, 345 East Oregon, to get them to building permit. I just addressed some questions to them yesterday, and it's my understanding that they will be applying for building permits in short order, though I do still see them doing a little bit of cleanup activity towards the front area where those commercial spaces are intended to be. We're still working through some interest down on Butte Road to partition the property that Bill Spencer annexed earlier this year. That's looking like it will end up being 2 developable home sites with 1 lot in the back that's kind of reserved for future development upon annexation of additional acreage. I have been working desperately to connect with, you're not the only one, Jessica, who's had a hard time connecting with Lane County. The city, you'll recall, has done two amendments to our comprehensive plan over the last year. One related to housing and housing need, and the other related to floodplain amendments to our code and to our comprehensive plan. Both of those have to be adopted or co-adopted by Lane County Board of Commissioners. So those are in process, but not moving very quickly. Further, we are continuing to work with some of our partners to put forward, we have 2 community development block grants just amid the pandemic and all of the factors that are affecting business owners and homeowners. You'll recall that there is actually a housing repair program for people who income qualify. If you hear of anyone who now their circumstances have changed and they now qualify based on income for access to the rural housing repair program, please contact me. I can get you in touch with the folks at St. Vincent de Paul. They are still taking applications for that program. It is up to a $25,000 nearly zero interest loan that gets repaid or paid off upon sale or transfer of ownership of a property. And it's, I think you only have to pay interest for the first 7 years, and then it relies on the sale as part of our revolving housing repair funds that each community in Lane County has participated in. So again, up to $25,000 to repair a roof, a bathroom, access to your house because you may need a ramp. Any of the and they also pair a lot of these projects with weatherization and other programs that are available through the county. So if you know anyone or your neighbors that could benefit from it, please let me know. They don't have to live in Creswell proper. They can live in other places. There are lots of projects that are going on as far out as Elmira, places out near Row River, Cottage Grove, etc. And then another grant project kind of came down the pipeline as part of the business loan program or business program. There is a micro enterprise low moderate income business owner grant program for business for workplace retention. I'm not sure what the criteria are exactly yet, but I know that Michelle Amberg was working on this diligently back in April, and what I understand is that the funds have just now been released through the county or through CDBG to the county and to us. So I've been working on some of the first draw requirements that come along with receiving federal funds, but there'll be more about that soon. So folks who are integral or tied into the business community, I'll have more information about that soon. And then finally, I am in the we just advertised and a job opening just closed for a planning specialist. So soon there will be another fresh face helping on my team over at City Hall. And I haven't gotten a chance to see any of the applications yet. The job closed yesterday at 5 p.m. But I'm hoping that of the 15 or so applications that came in, that one of them will be a golden ticket. And we'll get down to the business that we've all been trying to get to, which is looking at our urban growth boundary and trying to figure out how to help Creswell open up areas for growth. So those are kind of the things that are hot topics on my list. If you have questions about any of the other, and finally, Craig Estates 3rd edition, I think will be coming back to, we'll be just about finished up and going to final plat here, probably within the next 2 or 3 weeks. I know that's the development that was on the former Taylor property that will connect 5th Street to Crestwood Drive. Anything I forgot that anyone knows about?
Anything more on the old theater?
Interest. There were some folks looking at it from Campus Life, wondering if they could do some work trade and house some people and help them. Oh, look, we have a new planning commissioner.
Yeah.
He's awfully furry.
When you made that squeaky sound, whatever it was you moved.
Oh.
The pitch of that apparently scared her.
Oh, I'm sorry. But yes, we've had some interest. A lot of it has been residential. And
somebody needs to call the McMiniman brothers.
Yes. Or better yet, that reminds me of something I'll follow up on later. But yes, McMenamin Brothers would be a great idea.
Yeah.
Or even the Axe and Fiddle folks. You got any connections, David?
I don't go to the Axe and Fiddle anymore for a variety of reasons.
Fair enough.
Maddie, who's building what on Dale Cooney Road?
Dale Cooney Road, where they're placing fill?
Yeah.
That's been an ongoing project that Nathan Marple has been working on. He's placing fill there in hopes that at some point DEQ might allow the sewer service extension that he needs to develop that into some housing.
Okay.
But we're in a bit of a logjam with DEQ about extension of mainline sewer.
I think, Susan, are you talking about that house that's being redone?
I'm not sure what it is. I just saw some heavy equipment out there, like it was clearing the ground, and it backs up to the houses on Sunday Drive. So it's on the other side. You go down Dale Cooney and you look over at the back of the houses on Sunday.
It's just.
I thought you were talking about the one that's down from the golf course.
No.
The reason it's getting more fill is because he's developing, so he's moving dirt. He's the one that's developing over on Fifth. So the reason we're seeing a lot of fill is because it's really close to where he's developing, so he's able to just really quickly load and dump. Yeah, so that's why you're seeing so much of it right now.
Okay,
but,
that's all right. Good.
But do you know anything about that? That's going down, Maddie. That's going down past the golf course.
I know what's going on there. That farmhouse is being restored by Luke Jackson.
Yeah.
Very good. Luke has inquired actually about, in fact, 2 different people have inquired about urban growth boundary work and the timeline for that. Luke was one of them, and then another is Kelly Coughlin, who owns some land down near Ruby Claire, just South Butte Road, South 10th Street. And they both have ambition to, upon their inquiry, I invited them to participate in the UGB project, possibly as members of either a stakeholder group or on a technical advisory committee. You will all be hearing about that as soon as I'm able to do that. We're in a bit of I guess I'll confess, staff were in a little bit of a lull time in terms of long range planning. We have several council positions that are moving around or changing, and unfortunately and regretfully, with the loss of our current mayor and the loss of Councillor McReynolds this last week, we are we're likely having to wait until there's a little bit more stability and clarity on the council to move forward on some of the longer term projects. Thankfully, it's a short duration, and we'll see something on Monday. Not Monday, coming January. There's Lila. She's joining us too.
Yeah.
Dogs and children are getting restless.
All right, it must be time. The natives are restless.
Great job, Maddie, as always.
Thanks, Tammy. Does anyone have any questions or concerns? I really appreciate this opportunity to chat with you all and kind of hash out what all is going down at City Hall, seeing as no one's allowed to come in anymore. We got awfully lonely over there.
I have something, not really a concern, just an observation, since I happen to be on 2 planning commissions.
Sure.
The report that I get, the staff report that I get in Coburg, has all of the other departments, like, notes attached to it. Mm-hmm. One thing that I find particularly informative is the sheriff's call log. So I don't know if that's universal across all like commissions, if they all get everybody else's notes, or if that's just consistent with planning commission. But just being a contributing member of that community, I find it really fascinating to see what, like the Parks Board is up to, as well as like, wow, there's a crime spree going on. So just fodder.
And isn't that in the Chronicle?
It's also online. You can go online and look at it anytime. Sure.
Yeah.
I would also be happy to, Commissioners. I know it comes out as part of the City Council work session packet, the reports from each of the committees. And seeing as you are an integral committee to the City Council, and ironically the only one that doesn't have a report in the work session, they get your minutes, but that means that they hear about your business after the fact. But if there's an interest for, I guess there are two sides to that story. One is that we do have to maintain some autonomy because of the fact that they are the appeal body to your decisions. So we can't necessarily cross-pollinate all the time, or else they will hear about and then have ex parte contact for decisions that they may have appealed to them. Thankfully, not many. But that said, if you are interested in more information from other committees, which is what I hear from you, Councillor Clark, or Commissioner Clark, then we can, I can certainly send out a link to some of that material as it's available.
Thank you, Maddie.
You bet. To you, Chair.
Yeah. Is there anything else, guys? It looks like we have our next meeting is set for Thursday, November 19th of 2020. I'm assuming at 5 p.m. On the screen. So thank you, everybody. And this meeting is adjourned.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good to see you all.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.